I feel like I want you to just talk loads more about that. I don't know what the
But what's the subject of our God's attributes and qualities?
It's about God's attributes and qualities.
Yeah.
I feel that there's a whole lot. Could you tell me some more of the attributes that aren't there? Or
well, as I said, every attribute and quality sort of has all these sub-attributes and qualities. So when I list the attribute of love, for example, we could probably list lots and lots of different qualities that are sub-attributes of love and then describe every single one of those qualities in terms of how God exercises them. And we could do the same with truth, divine truth. We could do the same with humility. We could do the same with God's power and intelligence and wisdom and so forth, I feel. The main thing, though, for most people to get from this discussion is we have the ability to go through this experimentation process ourselves. We don't have to rely on Jesus or some other person telling us what God is like. We can actually discover a lot of what God is like for ourselves. We can go through the process ourselves of discovering what God is like. And so if you think about it, the actual experiment itself of receiving divine love into our own soul becomes the more important thing perhaps to discuss than anything else. And because that's what establishes the personal relationship. That's what allows us to eventually see God's attributes and qualities. So we can have a discussion where Jesus lists all of the attributes and qualities of God. And we go, oh yeah, that's another interesting attribute, quality. And we can examine it all from an intellectual perspective, never experiencing the quality, so never actually feeling that quality inside of ourselves, never actually displaying it ourselves because we have yet to feel it ourselves from God, and therefore it's yet to enter us, and never actually understanding anything about the universe. So we can go through the entire discussion of God's attributes and qualities without understanding a single thing, really, from an emotional perspective or from an experiential perspective, from our personal experience. Once we receive divine love into the soul, our soul, now we're going through an experience. The beauty of going through the experience is now when we talk about kindness, God's kindness, and we actually go through an experience where we felt God's kindness, now we can feel the attribute of God. And also we will now, because it's now inside of us, be able to start reflecting that attribute of God to other people who are around us, reflecting their kindness, if you like, to another person. And so what this does is it allows us to experience God through this connection or this relationship. So this thing going on is what I call the relationship. It's a real relationship that we're developing with God. And through the relationship, we're going through this wonderful process of discovering ourselves, discovering our potential, not just what we are now, but our future potential, and also discovering God herself through the process as well, because we're receiving part of God's attributes and qualities as we change. And then when we talk to another individual about God, we don't have to say, oh, do you think God's like this or do you think God's like that? Because we already know. We've already felt it and we've already experienced it, and we've already experienced a change in our own life in the way that we've demonstrated that reflection of that love to others. And so, of course, we can just go, wow, this is like, we know now that God has this quality of power. We also know how God delivers power to the universe, because I've actually personally experienced it, and that's how I deliver my power to the universe as well. That's, once I've personally experienced it from God and I've experienced that change me, I now deliver my power to the universe in the same way God delivers her power to the universe. And as I go through that personal experiment, I am now able, without any person's assistance, to say, I know what God's nature and quality is with this attribute of power, for example. Yep. So I do want to, of course, talk about God's attributes and qualities, but I feel even more importantly that we need to experience them rather than talk about them. And in fact, we can talk about them for a long period of time without experiencing them. And that is a sad thing, I feel, that much of humankind, if you look at almost all of the religions on this planet, they've talked about God you could literally say until they're blue in the face, and literally for many of them until they've died, they've talked about God without actually feeling any part of God in their nature. So in other words, by the time of their death, they are still wanting to kill people, for example. They still want to impose their will upon other people. They still want to conquer. They still want to do all sorts of other things, right, which are obviously completely against the very nature of God that they've been discussing their entire life. And so I do feel that there is a danger in a discussion such as this. And the danger is discussing all of this intellectual knowledge without feeling any of it. And if we discuss it all without feeling any of it, it does not have any power. It doesn't change our life. It doesn't change other people's lives either as a result. If we discuss it and then experiment and feel it, now we have the ability to change other people's lives. Now we have the ability to change completely. So I feel that it's very, very important when any person discusses God's nature and qualities and attributes, that they discuss it from a point of view of attempting to experience those qualities, like feel them, to actually feel them enter themselves, rather than just discussing the qualities as a pure what do they call it, as psychological or philosophical discussion. You know, we don't want to discuss God's great nature and qualities like that, because if we do that, we will end up dead in our life at some point in the future and still have not changed one single bit from that discussion. And therefore the world around us won't have changed through our existence being here either in a positive direction. If we allow ourselves to get away from the philosophy and the psychology and into the experience, now we have the ability firstly to transform our own self through the reception of divine love. But as we receive divine love, all of a sudden our nature and qualities, like our humility, our truth, our power, our intelligence, our wisdom, our love has now been all infused with these attributes that come from the divine. And so now we have the ability to reflect this divinity on earth and change the earth around us, change people around us through our interactions with them. That means that it has power in our life then. So it's pointless having an intellectual discussion without the power ever being experienced. Yeah. So that being said, if we discuss some of the qualities of God, and maybe we will discuss them in the future in more detail, we need to get to experience them before the discussion will benefit us in any way. And if you think about your own experience over the last few years since you've known me, how long has it been now? It's been a couple of years, hasn't it? Almost four. So time goes fast when you're having fun, doesn't it? Or not so much fun, depending on the emotions that come up. But if you think about it, when you first met me, your life was very... If you think about the experience of your life, you found the relationship issues in your life fairly consistent. They didn't change very much, right? They're sort of a consistent sort of thing is happening. Since in the last 4 years, if you notice, since meeting me, unfortunately sometimes, you've had huge changes in your life. And that's what happens when you start receiving divine love too, is that change, you feel motivated to change rapidly. You're not content with staying still anymore. You're not content with absorbing the environment's desires upon you and staying constrained by the environment. You want to expand, and so you're now not. You want to grow. You want to change. All these desires enter you that you maybe didn't have before, or didn't know how to exercise before. And that's the other beauty of this relationship, is that you have the ability to expand and grow through the relationship as well. And so I feel one of God's qualities is actually, if we started listing some of God's qualities, and here we're talking about the primary qualities, not the attributes of those qualities. Another part of God's qualities, which is probably through all of it, is change. Change is a part of God. So that tells me God must be changing, but it also tells me that if I want to get close to God, I've got to continuously change. I've got to always grow, always change. So growth or change is important. What other qualities do you feel there might be, Lily? Can you see when I ask that question, we can sort of use our intellect a bit, can't we? And we can go, okay, what qualities are inside of me, which obviously God must have, because if they got inside of me somehow, they had to come from somewhere.
Right. So I was going to ask about personality and humour.
Okay, personality, yeah.
And I guess the logic and reason comes under intelligence and wisdom.
Personnel.
Was
in the wrong place. Yeah, and a part of personality is things like humour, yeah, and so forth. That's an attribute of personality. Yeah.
But, so you were saying at the Soul interview last week that we're all given a part of God's personality.
A unique part of God's personality. So this is one of the things that I feel has definitely occurred, in that there's God. The way I feel at the moment is that God has an infinite number of aspects to her personality, and then what God has done in our creation of us as individuals is God has created us with a specific aspect of God's personality that isn't inherent in any other being that God has created, any other soul, human soul that God has created. And so the only way I can discover this particular aspect of God's personality is by actually interacting with the person who has it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And this is how God has involved us in the process of discovery of herself, but also involved us in the process of discovery of ourselves. So once we engage that particular aspect of our nature or personality in an active manner, that's the time we're going to grow the fastest towards our pure creation, towards what God created us to be.
So if humour is a part of personality, and
there's somebody on earth who has the best sense of humour, or in the universe.
Well, I was going to say that God must just find everything funny.
He does.
Because everybody's senses of humour are so different.
Exactly.
So God must be constantly amused.
Of course. Yeah, wouldn't you be?
I don't know.
Well, if you were looking at all of it, you'd be constantly happy, wouldn't you, as well, and joyful in all of your interactions, and you'd be constantly amused. Some things would just strike you as very, very funny, and sometimes you remember in humour we have different aspects and qualities to humour. Like irony is one type of aspect or quality of humour. So sometimes God finds things very ironic, when he observes things happening on earth that occur in the spirit world in a certain way. There is a lot of irony in that, and there is a lot of those kind of qualities. All the aspects of humour, if you examine them on earth, that you could examine them potentially, there are some. Now, of course, there are aspects of humour that are on earth that don't exist in God. Those aspects are the aspects that we've developed ourselves, which are out of harmony or in disharmony with love. So, for example, there's an aspect of humour you could call sarcasm. That isn't a part of God's nature.
It's based on anger.
Because it's based on anger and pulling a person down and making the person feel small and a lot of other unloving characteristics. And so sarcasm is not a part of God's nature. And so once we become at one with God, sarcasm will not be a part of our own nature. Does that make sense? But there are other aspects of humour which will remain. So every single quality that we potentially have as we receive divine love will become purified in its nature and totally in harmony with God's love.
So all of these other aspects that you've listed, as you say, can enter us and change us. But personality is different, right? Because our personalities don't change when we grow in love, do they? Or do they?
Yeah, how do they not? I feel they do grow. They certainly grow. So they change in the sense of growing, in terms of the way they're expressed. So, for example, when I was full of very sad emotions, obviously my sense of humour was not very present, right? And my sense of humour might have been based around sarcasm and rage, at the system or at the world or at particular individuals. Once I've received divine love, then my humour grows and changes. The personality trait the way I express my humour changes. So the sarcasm is destroyed, or the parts that are out of harmony with love get destroyed, and the parts that are in harmony with love become a part of my nature. Once I become at one with God, I'm still in a process of continual change. I have now discovered my nature, but not discovered how big it can be. So it's still going to grow, still going to change. The way in which I express my personality is going to change, and my personality will become bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger as a part of this growth and change. I also have the ability, if you think about it, using my intelligence, I have the ability to select the certain characteristics within myself that I do have and to grow that specifically if I desire to. So I do have the ability to select certain attributes and qualities that I have and to personally put an effort into those particular attributes and qualities.